Get out of my house, dude. Don't come through the door. I will shoot.
Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I'm very, very grateful. Listen, I'm trying to get GunGuyTV to 250,000 subscribers on YouTube and reach the 10,000 mark on Rumble. So if you wouldn't mind, please like, subscribe, share. That will help me get there a little quicker. I could really use your help. This time, I'm going to talk to Mark Oliva from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Mark is a great guy, and he's going to take us down the road of understanding what the Biden administration is doing, trying to shut down as many gun stores as possible. Pretty scary proposition. Without further ado, let's go talk to Mark. Mark, thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate the fact that you spent the time.
Yeah, it's great to see you again, Joel. It's great to talk to your listeners and your viewers. There's certainly a lot going on that needs to be discussed. I think everyone who respects and appreciates our Second Amendment rights certainly has a lot of questions about what's happening in respect to the firearm industry and lawful firearm ownership in America today.
Absolutely. And your organization is one that a lot of people might not be familiar with because you folks fight for the industry. So you're fighting for manufacturers, for retailers, for the various folks that function in our industry. And the tough part to remind people of is if you don't have a manufacturer making guns and making hunting products and making gear and making ammunition, then no guns, no products, no ammunition show up at the local sporting goods store or the local gun store. And I think the Biden administration knows that because it seems like they're going after the firearms industry tooth and claw. So can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in this fight to keep the firearms industry alive?
Yeah, so it's actually started during the campaign when then candidate, former Vice President Biden was on the campaign trail. Both he and Vice President Harris said at different points that they were going to use the ATF as a cudgel against the industry. They were going to use that ATF authority to go after what they termed as rogue gun dealers. And what they've actually done is turned the regulations on their head, and they're using every opportunity that they can to go after and shut down firearm retailers. So let me talk about what that means just a little bit. So the ATF has now adopted, through a White House policy, a zero tolerance policy when it comes to their inspections of firearm retailers. That means that prior to this, any inspection that was done of a firearm retailer would normally result in some findings. There would be some minor discrepancies, clerical errors, a misplaced decimal point, something entered into the wrong column of an A&D book or an acquisitions and dispositions book. That inspector would remind that retailer, hey, you need to do this right, need to do it this way, in order to stay within the laws and stay within the ATF's regulations. And those were, kind of par for the course. It's how things had been happening. Of course, if there are those firearm retailers that are purposely skirting the law and trying to go around it, we want them to be uncovered. We want their licenses revoked. We want them out of business. But this is not what the zero tolerance policy is. They're going in and they are revoking the licenses of firearm retailers who have been have these minor clerical errors. They're revoking those permits to sell firearms and shutting down their ability to do business, ending someone's, livelihood over a misplaced decimal point, over a clerical error, over something very minor that could have been corrected in those findings reports.
So what is their goal in doing this? I mean, what are they trying to accomplish by killing off these businesses?
Yeah, what they're trying to do through this is to limit your ability to lawfully exercise your Second Amendment rights. And you got to remind people sometimes that your Second Amendment rights belong to you, but they begin by your ability to approach a gun counter and purchase a firearm, purchase ammunition legally. Doing it lawfully with the 4473, with the FBI National Instant Criminal Background Check, there at the gun counter, that's where your Second Amendment rights and exercising those rights begin. And if they can limit that down and limit your ability, they're creating a barrier to entry for firearm ownership. And that's what they're trying to do, is to limit your ability to exercise your Second Amendment rights.
And Mark, I've had a couple of thoughts about this. I was talking with a friend of mine who's retired from the ATF, and he was saying one of his concerns is that every time a gun shop closes now, they have to take all of those records and send them to the federal government. Is this also perhaps an effort to create an unlawful registry of firearms by shutting down some of these places and getting their records, or is that just a conspiracy theory?
Well, I think there's a little bit of truth somewhere in the middle on that. Now, it's always been law that when a firearm retailer goes out of business, that they've been required to send all those paper records, all those 4473s that they've had to maintain for up until recently was just 20 years. They had to send those all to the ATF, and they would house those up in West Virginia. And you've probably seen some reports here and there about how there's shipping containers full of these things and the floor is falling through because they're not able to digitize them. Well, it's because the federal government's not allowed to have a national firearm registry, a searchable database, to be able to find out that Mark wasn't a gun owner yesterday, but today he is. That's illegal under the 1986 Firearm Owner Protection Act. So that part of submitting those records has always been part of that. But now under these recent changes that have come down, these final rules that have come down for firearm retailers are now required to maintain all those records in perpetuity. So before it was a 20-year span. If a business had been around for 20 years, anything that was 21 years or older, they could go ahead and shuffle off. But now they're required to maintain those in perpetuity. And of course, anybody that ceases to use their license, gives up their license, has their license revoked, has to send those up to West Virginia. So there is a concern on some.
Yeah, I mean, if they're not trying to create a database, a registry, then what's the purpose of doing that? I mean, if somebody purchased a gun 40 years ago, if they're my age and they purchase a gun and 40 years goes by, that individual's dead. Okay? Or they're 100 and something. And so what's the point of that?
And that's been our contention with the ATF, that we don't think that these are very good use of taxpayer dollars to maintain records that are decades and decades old. We've seen reports, of course, that they're saying that the administration is saying that the time to crime from when a firearm is first purchased to when it is recovered at a crime scene has been shrinking. It was up until recently about 10 years, 9 years. They say now it's going down closer to 7 years. But still, when we're looking at a firearm that was purchased 20 years ago, there's not a whole lot of law enforcement value, investigatory value, to being able to find out that Mark purchased that firearm 25 years ago. And now they've got to come find me. Okay, yes, I bought that firearm. What happened to that firearm? Well, I sold it to this guy over here, or I sold it to this firearm retailer as a trade-in on another firearm. And now they've got to go back and do all that tracing, which they always have to do anyway, anytime they recover a firearm at a scene. But anything that's beyond 20 years, what law enforcement, what investigatory value does it have to prove a criminal case when I did nothing wrong 20 plus years ago purchasing that firearm?
And what is the value in having a national gun database other than having a way? I mean, I'm going to play Mr. Paranoid here, okay? I'm going to put on my paranoid hat. Where's my tinfoil hat? I don't think it is a tinfoil hat, but I'm going to put it on anyway. The government, if the federal government, particularly when it's led by an administration like we have now, or many I could name in the past, has a database of firearms owners, that cannot be good for firearms owners. I just don't see a positive to that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there certainly is. And we oppose any kind of national firearm registry, because at that point, you're not tracking the firearm, you're tracking the owner. So what are you putting a law-abiding citizen on a government watch list for? We should all be very concerned if our government wants to put us on a watch list, especially for trying to exercise our fundamental constitutionally protected rights. So the only purpose that there would be for a national firearm registry is to know exactly what you have in your gun safe and where it is at all times. So at some point, if they decide they don't want you to have it anymore, they know exactly where to come find it.
And how does this? I mean, that's a scary proposition, Mark. It really, really is. How does that? Where's the nexus between that and all this stuff that's happening with the money? You got banks being pushed with their credit card companies to be able to identify purchases made of guns with their credit card. Yeah. You've got a push now to move to a digital currency so that they can, and Europe is already doing that from what I understand, so they can track every purchase of everything. I mean, this is, I don't know. I'm kind of, maybe I should buy another copy of 1984, of Orwell's 1984 and read it again. You know, am I getting a little too paranoid about this? This all seems to come together in a very negative way.
No, Joe, you're not the only one. And we saw the same thing with Amalgamated Bank. And this is a private bank. They're the ones who push for the International Organization of Standardization, the ones that create these merchant category codes, MCCs. Now, these are codes that exist for anywhere. If you go make a grocery store purchase with your credit card, there's a special MCC for that. If there's a purchase at a sporting goods retailer, which is what firearm retailers were listed under, there's a code for that. But it never looked into the basket. Nothing ever looked into what you were buying. It only said where you were buying these, what you were spending it on. And basically, is that so people could track your spending patterns if something was a little bit awry, so that if there was a potential crime, they would have to report that to the Financial Crimes Network, FinCEN. But Amalgamated Bank, and it's important to understand the history of Amalgamated Bank, they are what has been called by the New York Times the left's private banker. Now, this is the same bank that runs the accounts for the DCCC. It runs the accounts for Hillary Rodham's super PAC. It runs the accounts for Nancy Pelosi's super PAC. Elizabeth Edwards, I take it back, Elizabeth Warren's super PAC. So all these people who are anti-gun and are super blue are running this. Now, this was an idea that was proposed by Andrew Ross Sorkin at the New York Times. They got together with Amalgamated Bank, pushed the ISO to create this code, not once, but 3 times when they finally were able to push it through. And they got them to say, yes, we'll do it. And then after that, they said, this is just the first step. Well, the credit cards companies were mulling this over. We were pushing back. There were several other groups that were pushing back on this, saying this is a terrible idea. And eventually, one credit card company, Discover, came out and said that they were getting ready to administer this. But about the same time, that's when you saw Governor Jim Justice sign into law in West Virginia a bill that would, or a law that says you can't do this at all. We've also seen since then, Governor Little up in Idaho has signed a similar law. Just today, right before I called you, right before we got on this call, Governor Reeves down in Mississippi signed a law that says you can't do that down in Mississippi as well. And we're seeing that there's also a law on the move in Florida to do the same thing. So when the credit card companies saw this, they all put a pause on it. And they put out a statement saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to go forward until we have more information. We're going to put a pause on everything that there is. We also see that there's bills in Congress to prevent this from happening. But for right now, we think that these state laws that are going through are enough right now to cause these credit card companies to turn back. But the whole purpose of that was to be able to track what you were buying. And again, they said this was just the first step, was to be able to see what you were purchasing at a gun store. Now, the difficulty of it is if you go in to purchase something prior to hunting season. So it's duck season, and we all know that duck hunters love to spend a ton of money. I'm one of them who loves to do it too. So you're going to buy a new shotgun. You're going to buy a new shotgun. That's not going to be cheap.
Nope.
You're going to buy a flat of steel ammo, or if you're a big spender, you're going to start to buy some of the other alternatives, and that's not going to be cheap. Well, you need a new set of waders to go with it, and you need a whole bunch of new decoys, and you need all the greatest calls, because the call that you used last year certainly wasn't good enough than the one that you see on the shelf this year. So all that stuff can start to add up to a few thousand, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, right? Well, now that becomes a blip on your credit card, and they say that you made a purchase for, say, $5,000. When really only what you purchased that they might be concerned about is one shotgun and a flat of ammunition that you're going to use in the entire hunting season. So the next step that they wanted was to be able to look inside the basket to identify what you were purchasing. And we saw that this was the writing on the wall, and this is why we pushed back so hard against this. And thankfully, we've had these governors stand up. We've had some members in Congress stand up against this and say, absolutely not. This goes way too far. This is an invasion of privacy. The sticker of this all is those who were pushing for this, and there were certain Democratic congressmen and congresswomen and certain senators, to include Senator Warren was one of them, Senator Markey out of Massachusetts as well. They were going to try to use this to create the backdoor registry. If they could start to collect all this information through the private banking industry of how you were using your credit card to buy guns at gun stores or ammunition at gun stores, well, then they were doing the work that the federal government wanted them to do all along. They were going to create that registry of who is buying guns and keep that on a database, and then be able to tap into that anytime that they wanted to, especially when they started to want to look at what kind of gun you owned.
Wow. I've got to say, thank the good Lord for these state legislatures and these state governors, because without them, I think we'd be in very deep trouble. How does the desire to move to a digital currency affect any of this, or has NSSF given any thought to that? I don't see it happening anytime soon, but it seems to be the way in which the world is marching. And again, we get back to everything being trackable. And if it's all digital, then the government, here's the fears I read. The government can shut down my bank account. The government can say, no, you cannot buy this, that, or the other thing. Again, I'm putting, I went and made a special tinfoil hat just to talk to you today. And so I've got it on. I mean, is this a real concern?
We've been watching some of these things with the digital currencies, and we share some of those similar concerns that we're going along with the credit card companies. Now, if we look at what some state governments have been doing when it comes to, high-tech things that we have in our home, you're talking about thermostats that have been in people's homes in California. And when they have high time usage of electricity, they're forcing those people against their consent to either raise up what the temperature setting is in the house during the summer to avoid brownouts or blackouts, or lower those down in the winter when they're a little bit colder. So when you have these smart ideas, they're not so smart when it starts to come to your privacy. Same thing when it comes to our bank account. When this whole credit card thing started up, and I was talking to firearm retailers that were telling me they were actually putting ATMs back into their shops. They had taken them out of there because they didn't want them because they were an eyesore. And they were putting them back in because they didn't want their customers have to be concerned about withdrawing, or having to withdraw money somewhere else and then walk into the gun store to buy that gun because they didn't want to use their credit card to be able to track that purchase. So the bottom line is that paper dollar still has the full faith backing of the U.S. government for what it's worth. And I think everyone's starting to look at this now, starting to say there's a little bit too much big brother going on, a little bit too much reach into my privacy, a little bit too much interest by those who have other interests in how I'm spending my money and how I'm exercising my rights.
Thank you very much for listening and watching. There is more to this interview. Those will be posted in the next few days in short segments like this so that they're easier to consume. If you would like, you can support GunGuyTV by going to GunGuyTV Crew. You can sign up and find exclusive content there you can't find anywhere else. I add it every week. That you can find at GunGuyTVCrew.com, or you can just go to Locals or Patreon. Again, look for those future episodes of this same interview in the next day or so. Thank you again for watching. Wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.